What kind of mind smiles at children by day and buries their bodies by night? John Wayne Gacy wasn't just a murderer. He was a contradiction so stark it still unsettles the world decades later. To the public, he was a respected businessman, the neighbor who hosted barbecues, the man who dressed as Pogo the Clown to entertain kids in hospitals. But behind that carefully constructed mask lay a predator responsible for the brutal deaths of at least 33 young men and boys, most of them buried in the crawl space beneath his home. Gacy's crimes horrified the nation, not only for their brutality, but for the dissonance between his image and his acts. He wasn't the monster hiding in the shadows. He was the man next door. Have you ever wondered what truly drives a mind like this? How someone so embedded in society could carry such darkness undetected for so long? This isn't about spectacle. It's about the hidden architecture of a mind designed not just to deceive others, but to dominate them. Stay with me. The truths we are about to uncover go deeper than you might expect. To begin understanding Gacy, we must strip away the headlines, the horror, even the crimes themselves, and look at the man beneath the mask, the one who walked freely among us, smiling, the one whose story begins not with violence, but with something far more insidious: absence. Let's go back to where it all started. Gacy's early life offers no dramatic explosions of trauma, only a steady erosion of self. A father whose affection came laced with ridicule, a boy who learned early that approval was earned through obedience, not presence. Silence became his refuge, shame his compass. What happens to a child who learns that being good means being invisible, that love must be negotiated through masks? As we peel back these early layers, we begin to see that the roots of psychopathy are often buried in the quiet, not the chaos. It's not about excusing what came later. It's about confronting the slow formation of a mind that would one day seek absolute control. Have you ever recognized fragments of these patterns in ordinary people? Share your perception. Your voice matters here. This space, Criminal Psychology Unmasked, exists not to shock, but to question. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a second to check. And if this kind of deep exploration speaks to you, consider joining us. Here, we explore, not excuse. Because before there were victims, before there was a basement, there was a boy learning how to disappear behind a smile. And it's in that disappearance that the first fracture formed, the first quiet breach between emotion and behavior. As we move forward, we'll begin to trace how charm became Gacy's weapon and how manipulation, not rage, became his signature. Let's continue. The transformation of John Wayne Gacy didn't erupt from a single event. It emerged slowly, molded in the shadows of a home where love was conditional and control was currency. His father, a World War I veteran, was described as volatile and relentlessly critical, a man who often called his son sissy and mama's boy, publicly undermining his masculinity. These constant humiliations planted early seeds of inadequacy, creating a void that Gacy would later fill with manipulation, domination, and performance. By age 9, Gacy suffered a serious head injury during a swing accident that resulted in blackouts for years, incidents his family often dismissed. Around the same time, he began to withdraw emotionally, though outwardly he tried to conform. He joined the Boy Scouts. He went to church. He smiled. But the fracture had already begun, a mental divide between the person he presented and the identity forming beneath the surface. One early revelation comes from Gacy's own words during a police interview: "A clown can get away with murder." Though said with a smirk, it exposes a chilling truth about his internal journey. A man who not only learned to wear masks, but found power in them. As an adult, his role as Pogo the Clown wasn't just community theater, it was the perfected persona of someone who had mastered the art of hiding. The charm, the jokes, the attention, all tools, all camouflage. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover. Gacy's earliest criminal accusations, from sodomy charges in Iowa to testimonies about coercion and deceit, point to a mind already experimenting with control long before the murders began. The emotional detachment wasn't sudden. It was earned through repetition, through years of internalizing that real connection was dangerous and domination felt safer. If this analysis sparked something inside you, leave in the comments. There's always a hidden layer. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here. As Gacy stepped further into adulthood, he didn't just wear a mask, he became it. His public identity was meticulously constructed. A successful contractor, a precinct captain in the local Democratic Party, and a man who routinely hosted elaborate neighborhood parties, sometimes with over 100 guests. Behind closed doors, he built a reputation as dependable, likable, even generous. And it was precisely this social capital that gave him permission to operate without suspicion. Neighbors called him friendly and helpful. Political figures attended his barbecues, but behind the scenes, in the unlit crawl space beneath his home, bodies were being hidden, victims of calculated, ritualistic control. Gacy didn't kill impulsively. He lured, dominated, and dehumanized. The psychological impact of his charm wasn't just on others, it was on himself. It reinforced the illusion of invincibility. It was a double life crafted not out of necessity, but as part of a deeper identity, one that required approval to function and total power to feel alive. During his trial, one witness recalled Gacy saying, "You know, clowns can get away with anything." The statement wasn't just arrogant, it was revealing. It reflected a mentality that saw performance as protection. Manipulation wasn't the means to his crimes, it was the crime. Long before the murders occurred, his ability to navigate both worlds, the admired and the abhorred, speaks to a personality that didn't split under pressure but rather thrived in contradiction. Now let's go even deeper into this duality. What happens when control stops being enough? When the performance no longer satisfies the deeper hunger beneath? That's where the next stage of his transformation begins. Not in the streets, not in his business, but in the basement, where his identity was no longer masked, it was unleashed. Now, let's go even deeper into this. Into the basement where John Wayne Gacy's transformation from manipulator to full predator reached its most disturbing form. This was no random space. It was chosen, controlled, and ritualized. Victims were brought not just to be silenced, but to be stripped of identity. First, psychologically, then physically, Gacy's methods were disturbingly consistent. He would lure young men with offers of work, promise quick cash, or impersonate authority. Once inside, they entered his domain, a place where Gacy dictated every rule, every movement, every breath. One recurring tactic he used was the so-called handcuff trick. He would show his victims a magic routine, pretend it was a joke, until the cuffs snapped shut. That single moment was more than a tactic of restraint. It was the turning point from illusion to domination. In court, one survivor testified that Gacy would mock them once the cuffs were locked, saying, "Now you can't get out, now you're mine." These weren't just words, they were declarations of a mental shift. The mask slipping away to reveal a man who didn't just kill, but orchestrated control with mechanical precision. The basement became a symbolic theater of this control. Not only did he bury the bodies beneath his house, but he also lived above them, ate, slept, hosted guests, as if the division between life and death was simply a matter of architecture. This spatial choice reveals a chilling perception. Gacy saw himself as both judge and God over those he selected. The repetition of the ritual, the way he compartmentalized acts of murder within an ordinary life, points to a mind no longer navigating morality, but manufacturing power. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover. What happens when that sense of power becomes Too complete, too constant. When even death loses its impact, that's when we must turn to what psychiatrists found and what they didn't. After Gacy's arrest, investigators and mental health professionals were faced with more than just evidence. They were confronted with a psychological labyrinth. His calm demeanor under interrogation, his cold recollection of events, and his near-obsessive focus on control left little doubt about one thing. He was fully aware of what he had done. But that awareness raised a deeper question. Did he feel anything? Court-appointed psychiatrists offered varying diagnoses. The prosecution leaned heavily on antisocial personality disorder, a clinical framework defined by a long-term pattern of manipulation, disregard for others, and absence of remorse. Gacy fit this model with precision. One psychiatrist, Dr. Helen Morrison, who spent over 60 hours interviewing him, testified that he exhibited traits of a manic type of schizophrenia, though this opinion was heavily contested. She noted how Gacy would switch personalities during interviews, from the responsible businessman to the cold predator, as if compartmentalization had become his defense mechanism and his weapon. But perhaps the most chilling revelation came not from medical reports, but from Gacy himself. When asked if he felt guilty, he replied, "I should never have been convicted of murder. I never killed anyone." This denial wasn't just legal strategy. It was a glimpse into a fractured identity, a man so deeply immersed in his constructed roles that even the reality of death could be mentally erased. Now let's go even deeper into this psychological split. What happens when a man builds an identity so complex, so layered, that even accountability dissolves within it? As the trial unfolded, it became clear. Gacy didn't need to believe he was innocent. He only needed to believe he was still in control. And in that belief, his final mask remained intact, right up to the moment he faced judgment. Now let's go even deeper into this final act, the courtroom, where John Wayne Gacy was no longer able to control the stage, yet never stopped performing. The trial began in 1980, and what unfolded wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a confrontation between a system built on facts and a man built on distortion. The evidence was overwhelming, bodies exhumed from beneath his home, chilling testimonies from survivors, and confessions laced with contradiction. Yet, Gacy sat calmly, often scribbling notes, sometimes smiling, never showing genuine emotion for the lives he had taken. During the trial, prosecutors painted a picture of methodical cruelty. One survivor recalled how Gacy would tighten a rope around his neck while watching the terror in his eyes. That behavior, the prosecution argued, revealed not impulse but intention, a need to dominate that was deeply ingrained in his identity. In response, Gacy maintained his innocence, calling himself the 34th victim and insisting he was the target of a conspiracy. That declaration wasn't just delusional, it was tactical. Even stripped of his freedom, he tried to maintain narrative control. After weeks of testimony and expert analysis, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before declaring him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to death. But even in the final phase, as his execution drew near, Gacy clung to his performance. His last recorded words before lethal injection were, "Kiss my ass." No remorse, no acknowledgement, just defiance, the final gesture of a man who had spent his life rewriting reality to suit his image. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover. Justice may have silenced him, but what echoes remains is not just the memory of his crimes. It's the unsettling realization of how far someone can go when their entire existence becomes an exercise in control. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here, because Gacy's story, as horrifying as it is, doesn't exist in isolation. It lingers, not just in court transcripts or crime documentaries, but in the uneasy realization that psychopathy rarely announces itself with violence. It blends in, it imitates, it learns what we admire, then uses it as cover. That's what makes the Gacy case so disturbing. His transformation into a killer was not immediate. It was a gradual shedding of empathy, cloaked in the rituals of everyday normalcy, and that ritual is what often escapes our perception. Even after his conviction, journalists and criminologists continued to examine the details, not to sensationalize, but to understand. How did a man so deeply disturbed build a life that looked on the surface like success? How many decisions, social, political, professional, helped solidify that illusion? Behind every community award he received, every handshake with a politician, every child he entertained in costume, there was a silent truth forming beneath the surface. And that truth is what haunts us. It forces us to confront the idea that evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like trust. Psychologists often point to a chilling blend of narcissism, lack of remorse, and manipulative charm as indicators of psychopathy. But what the Gacy case reveals is the danger of ignoring the slow erosion of empathy, the micro-decisions that build an identity of entitlement, objectification, and control. It wasn't only the murders that made Gacy who he was. It was the pattern of seeing others not as people, but as opportunities, tools, obstacles. And when that perception hardens, when it becomes routine, the consequences are no longer private. They're buried in basements, etched in memory. If this reflection resonates with you, write below, "The mind hides more than we dare to see." If you found meaning in this deep dive into the unseen layers of the human psyche, I invite you to subscribe to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. Each week, we continue this journey, not to simplify, but to understand, to ask what lies beneath and what patterns remain hidden in plain sight. Right below, the labyrinth never ends. Your reflections add dimension to this space, and your voice matters. If this kind of exploration resonates with you, if you value analysis over spectacle and truth over myth, a like helps us continue shining light into the darkest corners of the human mind. The human mind remains an endless labyrinth, and every case we explore only reveals how fragile the line between reality and darkness can be. In our next journey, we'll dive into another mind, shaped by forces just as hidden, just as powerful. I'll be waiting for you in the next video.